All right, so feedback loops. After every weekend, I end up getting a ton of feedback from the student athletes that we work with and their parents, and or if they're adult student athletes, I'll get a ton of feedback from them where they get excited about the outcomes of their past events. Now, the people who are performing at the highest levels consistently understand that these competitions are basically, I'm just adjusting this, sorry, are basically just feedback loops. And they're feedback loops, the number of them that they have, you don't want too many of them, but you want to have as much as necessary, and you want to have them to be as short as necessary to be effective, meaning there's a minimum effective dosage to things, and you need to drill down to that level if you're trying to get to your highest level. And a good example is in the movie Moneyball. In the movie, I believe it's Brad Pitt, and I forget the name of the other gentleman that's in there, but what they're doing is they're trying to work on the analytics and the math, the calculations, the formula, so to speak, of what they feel would be the best to apply to get the Oakland Athletics to the highest level possible. And what they're saying when they first start out is, what are we doing, or what are we not doing, or what are we looking at or not looking at that we should be? And so, but what is the serving size, what is the sample size that we need that's going to be the minimum effective to evaluate and calculate whether or not something's working for us or not, and where we need to tweak it. And so that's what we have here in like kind of best practices and the habits and assumptions and adjustments that you need to have in your life as a human performer. So when you're trying to evaluate whether or not something's working, it's like, can you make that assessment? Can you do that? Can you judge on something after you've only done it once? Well, most people are like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Like, what's the number? And getting used to what that number is for you is going to be really, really important. So maybe going out over a course of a weekend might not give you enough feedback on whether or not something's working properly, especially if you weren't at your optimum level. Or maybe you didn't set it up right. So what you want to do is you want to evaluate your systems, your structure, your habits, your best practices, and this is important, your assumptions. Because a lot of times we assume things to be a particular way, and they're not quite that way. And what happens is, when you assume something and you're basing your decisions on these assumptions, well, I don't want to say beliefs, because it's basically the state of a situation where you're judging something wrong, and then you're basing your calculations on that assumption. And so a lot of times people have good calculations, but they have some poor assumptions, and so you're never going to have the best formula. So when you're sitting down to evaluate how you did over the weekend, if you won, that's great. But if the goal is really later on down the road, then winning over the weekend doesn't always give you as much feedback as you need to get to the highest level. So it's not just about going and kind of grinding out the wind and doing what you've always done, but it's about building on what you've done so that when you get to the next level, to that higher level, that you can effectively execute on what you need to at that level in order to win, the world championship or a national championship or whatever it is. Especially if you're at a qualifier. Qualifiers are championships unto themselves, and you want to do your best, but you're not at like a mini championship. You're not usually trying out a ton of new material, so to speak, but you should be trying to get a feel as to how this is going to be received, because in that state of play, you'll see how things are going to be, effective or not effective, or how you need to adjust and accommodate for the way that other people will adjust and accommodate. And that's going to evolve along the way. So the most important thing is getting down your system. What is it that's your feedback loop? Now, and I don't mean like the Facebook feed that comes down the news, but it is kind of like the Facebook feed, because the feedback loop is going to be those key performance indicators that you're tracking, or your key performance barometer or index, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Give yourself an acronym, something to make it fun, and then the easiest way to track it for you, that's up to you. You determine that. And you don't want to track a ton of things, but track as many as necessary, but no more than needed. And it's the same thing with the feedback loop. How long of a feedback loop do you want? You want it to be as short as necessary, because the quicker the loop, the quicker you can make improvements, and the quicker you can grow.